Thank you, Ronan. All right, so let's begin. Good morning or good evening to all, and welcome to Data Driven Community Virtual Meeting. A few words about the Data Driven Community. If you will check the community website, then you can notice we are managing two branches of activities. Scroll down the page a little bit to see the upcoming events. On the left side of the page, you can notice the Future Data Driven Summit. That's an annual joint conference. We are leading and running with multiple data platform user group partners. The second branch of activity are weekly meetings of the cloud data driven user group like today. You are more than welcome to contact any of the community board. Jean Joseph is the founder and co-administrator. Ronan is the second co-administrator, and Anna Wikes is the third moderator. My name is Deepthi Goguri, and I am moderating today. I'm a database administrator and a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. I'm the third co-admin of the data-driven community, and I will be hosting the session today. Together, we are here to help serve the data platform community. During the meeting today, please feel free to use the chat for any questions and discussions as well. You are also more than welcome to use the reactions. It doesn't interfere with the course of the meeting. If you hear something you love or like, or you want to clap hands, please feel free to do so. Today, we are very honored to have Jim Novak with us. Jim is a principal technical PM at Microsoft and a former Microsoft Business Application MVP and a Dynamics 365 technical architect specialized in Power Platform development. Jim, you can go ahead and share your screen and add a few words about yourself.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, while I'm sharing, I'll take over here real quick. I'll present my screen. Yeah, my name is Jim Novak. I thank you for allowing me to present. My background is mostly in Power Platform over the years, but in the last year or two, have been focused on our team. Our health and life sciences team has been focusing on expanding our data platform. Power Platform is actually part of that, but what I wanted to talk about today is our Fabric offering. Not necessarily it's not necessarily a product. I'd like to talk more about how we've implemented our healthcare solutions on Microsoft Fabric. So what I'll drop my camera here. Just want to say hello, just to keep things moving smoothly with bandwidth. You never know how Teams is going to interfere with that. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about our healthcare data solutions in Fabric. It's the group that I work with is Microsoft's Health and Life Sciences team. If you're familiar with Microsoft's healthcare offerings, we previously had Azure Health Data Services. We had Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, which kind of encompassed a lot of different things. And we've actually acquired Nuance several years ago, and we've now merged together into one health and life sciences organization. And the group that I work with focuses on the data platform. One of the things we want to do is leverage the Microsoft platforms to make healthcare solutions easier on our customers. So one of the reasons we're doing this, let me make sure I can navigate using this dialogue in Teams. What I'll talk about real quick is I'll go over the landscape. It kind of drives why we're building stuff. Talk a little bit about Fabric, and for everybody here, you're all data gurus, so feel free to jump in with questions. I'd much rather have a conversation than me talking at everybody. If I don't see the question pop up, feel free to just jump in and interrupt. Again, I much prefer conversations than speeches. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your background on the platforms, your experiences in the industry, if you have any, that kind of stuff. But I'll talk about Fabric as a platform very quickly, and I'll talk about our solutions, why we're building it. Oh, I see a pop-up. Is everybody able to see my screen?
We can see your screen, but we cannot see you. Like I can see your screen, but we cannot see
I'm
you
sorry.
Actually.
Yeah, I turned my camera off.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I turned my camera off just because the video sometimes interferes with Teams presenting.
If I may, Jim. I highly recommend to use your camera. We do not have
Okay,
like 200 people in the meeting, and you are the only one that use the camera. So the streaming is good, and it's
sound
very important in virtual meeting because it gives like feeling of interaction, which we don't have like a real meeting, physical meeting.
no problem at all. There we go.
Awesome. We can see you.
Okay, cool. All right, sorry about that. So cool. So I'll talk about our solution. I'll talk about our healthcare data model, which is kind of centered, the center of our solution. And we have a tool called Discover and Build Cohorts, which we'll go over. I'll talk a little bit about that. What I'm going to focus on is more the foundation of what we've built. We've got a lot of components, which I'll talk about, but this is kind of what I want to cover in this session. And what I'll do with the demo is I'll just dive in and I'll open up our solution, show you some of the moving parts, show you Fabric if you're not familiar with it yet, and look at some of the data model components that we've built and kind of how our solution lands. So as I mentioned, why are we building this, right? We want to invest in healthcare solutions, but we have to have a reason for it, right? We want to help solve some problems that are not necessarily unique to healthcare, but in a lot of enterprise applications, we've got these problems. But healthcare is a bit unique because of a lot of the requirements around this, a lot of the standards you have to meet, HIPAA requirements we're all probably familiar with. So these are some challenges that the industry faces on top of just standard technical debt, that kind of stuff. And a couple of the highlights we want to talk about is like we've got unstructured and inaccessible data. So unstructured data, think of doctor's notes. A very common practice is to record a note, have it transcribed as a piece of text, and it's not codified. And then once that data is brought into a system, it's not accessible. You get these siloed systems, which we'll talk about in a moment. You get a limited view into your patient experiences. So you can't use this data because it's siloed and it's not structured. A lot of times it's hard just to even use it, right? So some of the things, clinicians and focused on clinicians for the time being, because we have other personas like payers in the healthcare space for insurance and whatnot. They can't use this data to improve care, right? So we can't take this data, forecast emergencies, improve the diagnostics, and make your treatments better. Ultimately, you want to have better patient outcomes, and that's where the power of insights comes in. So we have this challenge of you spend so much time as a clinician or a healthcare provider just working on the brute force of processing the data processing. You don't actually focus on the problem at hand with the patient and the patient care. Another view on this to get a little more detail on the silos we're talking about. That statistic at the top of the slide, when I first saw that, it blew me away. We got 50 petabytes of data across 10 siloed systems every year, and 97% of it goes unused. I can share the link to this where we've got this information from, and that's a tremendous problem. And again, this is healthcare where we're focused on helping patients, right? We're focused on making your care better, and if that's a challenge in this industry, it has real impacts on people. So you can see we've got lots of different kinds of data. We've got clinical data, something we're probably all familiar with, your EHR. This is your demographics, your medications, your visits, et cetera. Conversational data, I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier about notes. We have doctors transcribing notes, and they're dealing directly with patients. How do you capture that interaction? The patient engagement data is a lot of times that gets confused with marketing, right? That's more of an outreach where you're talking to your patients once they've been discharged. You want to make sure that they're doing what their doctor says, right? Taking your meds, making your visits, that kind of stuff. SDOH, social determinants of health. We have lots of data sets out there about the demographics of people and where they might have challenges. For example, access to transportation can be a big problem in making a visit. And SDOH data, there's lots and lots of data sets around there out in the public that can really help you drive your care. Claims data, exactly what it sounds like. We've got claim information from payers. Genomics data is fairly new to us, but that's out there and it's being more and more used in clinical space. And then also imaging data. If you've ever had an X-ray, CT scan, MRI, all that fun stuff, there's an entire standard around persistent imaging data. And you can see these are all relevant to your patient 360 view. Or if you're an educational institution with a hospital, they talk about members or just people 360 view. So it's not necessarily just patients. There's a lot of information in here about other kinds of visits than clinical. And what we want to do is break down those barriers and bring it into a single unified space. And Fabric is our platform for doing that. So Microsoft is leveraging the Fabric solution, which year and a half, I think it's been out live, and it brings together, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but we want to pull it all together in one space, and Fabric is our way of doing that. And the way we do this, kind of the thought process, the mindset behind this is we want to unify the data. We want to bring it all together and make it accessible to these different teams. One phrase I've heard, and I'm not sure if it's on the slide, is democratize the data, right? Put it all in one place where everybody has access to it. So we break down the silos, and then everybody can benefit from having access to this data. I've heard stories over the years in places I've worked in the past where you might have access to data that you didn't have before, and you might have an insight you didn't think you were looking for, and that's absolutely going to be more relevant whenever you get into these unified data sets. So our strategy around this, kind of what I was alluding to, is we want to first connect the data. We want to bring the data together. We want to unify it into a single place. Single pane of glass is a phrase you'll hear a lot. Put it in one spot, and then look at it. Let's analyze it. Let's take a look at the data, and then allow our end users, a clinician or basically a care delivery person, can take that analytics and apply it to their daily processes. How am I caring for patients? How am I making sure my patients are, getting the best medications, getting the best care, getting care plans, that kind of stuff. And then you see the arrow. I just highlighted it in red prior to the talk. I realized it wasn't very obvious, but this is a iterative process. This is meant to be repeatable. We continue to bring in the data. We continue to unify it. We continue to take a look at it and then apply it, right? Because having all this data is great, and it's not just writing reports. We want to apply it to their daily operations. And interoperability, compliance, and security are all underlying all of this. Healthcare has lots of standards, and you've probably already seen the acronyms here. You can see them in that first bit. Not AWS, but FHIR and DICOM. Those are two industry standards for dealing with clinical, largely focused on clinical data, but also imaging data is DICOM. So FHIR is Fast Health Interoperability Resources, and DICOM is I can't remember that acronym. It's on one of the slides later, but it's an imaging standard. You'll also see acronyms like OMOP. You'll see SDOH I mentioned a few times. So we're trying to make this, the connecting this and unifying it largely depends on these standards. We're going to conform to these standards so that we're all speaking the same language. The industry has already been thinking about these things for years. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to conform to those standards. Once we've got it unified in a common place, then we can apply our analytics and AI to it. And then again, rinse and repeat. That's why we want to make this into a single location, so we don't have to have all these silos in place. And unifying the data will make that repeatable process much, much better. So a little bit, why are we doing this? Again, what are the benefits we're going to get out of this, right? So kind of repeating myself a little bit, we want to make the data accessible and discoverable. Once it's accessible and discoverable, and we've put it into a format that you can use, it's going to accelerate your time to insights. If it's easier to get to this stuff, you spend less time on, as I mentioned before, the data processing, the brute force side of things, and I can focus on the problem at hand. And again, there's the democratize, there's a phrase. You put this all into one place, you make it accessible to different groups of people, and they may have different perspectives than you might have, and then we can apply our AI tooling to this. And we want to basically fuel the AI innovation once we've got this into a unified space. It'll just continue to feed on itself. As we see more insights, we can go back and repeat the process like we saw in the previous slide and continue to fuel this. And again, our tooling allows that. So we're talking about Fabric as our platform for unification and transformation, but then our AI Studio allows you to access all this data once it's in one place and make it easier to apply those rules. And obviously, secure and governed is pretty important. We're in healthcare, right? Like any other industry, we want to protect our data, but healthcare is especially important to a lot of people. We've got a lot of rules around it for a good reason. So just another kind of look at what we've just been talking about, kind of repeating myself again. We've got a centralized repository. We're going to massage and prepare this data, and then we're going to apply our tooling to allow you to get insights out of it. again, I was talking to somebody recently, and they said I should highlight, it's a mindset. We want to unify this data, bring it all together. We've got these silos, we break them down. The tools are secondary to that. The mindset is we want to unify this data as much as possible. And we'll see that in the demo. I'll show you at the end of the demo where we've pulled together clinical data and imaging data. And that's really important because part of the silos isn't just access to it, but being able to look at it together is an enormous problem, or an enormous challenge. Shouldn't say problem. Once we've got it in one place, being able to look at it. So part of that unification or harmonizing, I think some people might say, is doing some data transformation. So get access to it, put it in one place, and then apply these transformations. And in our case, we're taking industry standards and we're transforming a lot of this inbound data into a common standards-based format, and then it makes it much, much easier to apply these tools. So that mindset is what we're focused on here before we ever get into the tooling. And I thought it was a really good point that I wanted to bring up, because now we start talking about technology, but why are we here? Why did we choose this? And it was all of that mindset feeding into this. So I'm going to assume a lot of people on the call are familiar with Fabric, because this is a data-centric user group. You're probably way more familiar than I am to a large degree. But Fabric is a new offering from Microsoft, again, about a year and a half old. In fact, we started the healthcare solutions project before Fabric was GA'd. So it was interesting. Our team got to see a lot of this feed into their build out. But a lot of these things should be familiar, right? If you go to the Fabric workspace, it's powerbi.com, right? So should be familiar with, so those who are familiar with Power BI, doing data analytics and report writing. But we've also got Data Factory, Synapse, engineering and data science. We got data warehousing as there, and real-time analytics. I think real-time analytics is relatively new, and our data activator. I won't go into this in tremendous detail, but again, because I'm assuming that everybody is pretty familiar with this, and it's all built on a unified storage called OneLake. And that layer underneath called Purview allows us to govern this. And that's very important to our team. We've got some solutions and some templates in Purview that allow you to do kind of medical classifications and tagging, because we know that this is very important. We're not just throwing this over the fence for everybody to use. We're leveraging the tools for security as best we can. And you can see the sales points of this. It's a complete data platform, unified analytics. It's not just one persona. It's data professionals is a very broad term. You don't have to be a data engineer to go in and use this solution. And underneath all of it, we're driving AI innovation, as I mentioned before. We want to bring all this data together and put it in a format that makes it easier to execute our AI use cases against it. So where do we come in? So we got this great Fabric platform. I don't work for the Fabric team. I work for Health and Life Sciences, and we know our customers want this analytics platform. They want to pull all this data together. Again, we're healthcare, we're hospital systems, hospital organizations as a whole. We've got government agencies interested in this that deal with healthcare across the world, and we've got educational institutions. So they have this problem. We're responding to their problem. So what we said is, Fabric is an excellent tool. Let's build our stuff on top of it. So where we come in is what we've done is we've packaged up our tools as a healthcare solution that can be deployed into Fabric. And I'll show you this when we get into the demo. One of the first things you'll see at the top is data discovery and cohort management. Think of research, right? I'm a research team, and I want to go look at this data, and I want to run a study on a drug that we're evaluating, or some other study for a certain treatment that you're putting together. So discovering data can be a real big challenge, and we want to try to address that. Underneath all this, it relies on our data model. Our data model, I've alluded to it, and we'll take a look at it. We got a couple of different things going on. It's the industry standards-based implementation of a data model in Fabric in our lakehouses. To enable that, to get the data in, because that's the next thing everybody asks. Great, you got this data model. Where does it come in? How do I get my data in there? So we've got a series of transformations that will allow you to take data in a certain format and move it between these different components or different lakehouses. And then once it's there, we've got some other analytical solutions we're building on top of it. And again, we'll go into this in a little bit more detail when you see our components. But we're building on top of Fabric. We're a solution built on top of the Fabric platform. And again, the really cool thing, having seen this in the past, where you kind of we built this Power Platform. We worked on a platform that was very well established, but our team worked very closely with the Fabric team as they were rolling it out, so we got to give them some really good feedback. It was a really neat experience. So what's the solution look like? And again, I'm seeing pop-ups with questions, so feel free to just jump in and interrupt me if you have a question. So when I mentioned our solution, what does it look like? One of the first things that we started talking about was we as a team, we didn't want this to be here, take this monolithic solution, because not everybody has the same need, right? We've got some of our customers talking to us about research. We've got some of our customers talking about, I need to improve care, right? Operational improvements. Others, we want to focus on clinical data. Others, we want to focus on claims data. So we didn't want this to be a monolithic solution, so we broke it apart into these kind of reusable, I don't want to call them Lego blocks, but kind of that mindset. Take what you need, right? And obviously we've got the data discovery and exploration tool that I mentioned earlier, and we'll take a look at that. It's a really, really neat, powerful tool. On top of that, we've got our data transformations. So we've got these lake houses, if you're familiar again with Fabric, and I'll talk about the components in a moment. That's where you land the data, but how do you get it in there into a certain format that's usable? That's where we've got these transformations. And you can see we support Azure Health Data Services, claims data, DICOM, genomics. Well, that's in the future. Sorry, I should highlight that a little bit better. That's not ready for public consumption yet. SDOH I've talked about briefly as well, and OMOP. We've also got analytic solutions built on top of this. Now that we've got the data, how do we help you look at it in a useful way? We leverage some of our first-party tools, Dynamics 365 Customer Insights. We have some tools that help prepare this medical data into Customer Insights as a tool. And this is where I said sometimes we talk about D365, like we're not doing marketing. We don't want to do marketing. It's mainly meant for patient outreach. How do I look at my patient population, communicate with them, and make sure that they're doing what we ask them to do? If you're familiar with care plans, how are you following your care plan as an example? Care management analytics is another one. It's as you notice, some of them are in public preview, some of them are GA. Unless it's marked in parentheses, it's GA. Care management analytics is how am I doing operationally? There's some tooling there, and patient outreach analytics kind of goes hand in hand with our customer insights. And then we've got data enrichments. We've got all this data. You can get enormous amounts of data. I'll show you our sample data, millions and millions of records. How can I enrich that with conversational data? There's some options there we're working on. And unstructured clinical notes, so text analytics and health, for example. How do we enrich the data we have with this other information? This is part of the unification process, and it's not just the static move it from one place so you can query it. It's part of the transformation, the harmonization, if you want to call it that. We'll see all those in action in the demo. So I saw that question. So I'll answer that real quick. Let me pull it up. $1 million question, how do you get the data from EMRs into the Lakehouse? So right now, we have a couple of different formats we support, and I think I have a slide that talks a bit about them. We rely on industry standards, for example. I mentioned that, FHIR, DICOM, claims. So with clinical data, we typically rely on FHIR format, right? And specifically FHIR in an ND-JSON format. It's kind of a flattened version of FHIR. If you're familiar with FHIR, FHIR is a JSON-based standard. It's kind of a hierarchical representation of a record. It's not very relational. And then you could even flatten it out further into ND-JSON format for bulk import. We'll take that, ingest it into our Lakehouse, and I'll show you what that looks like. DICOM, we ingest DCM files. With claims data, I believe it's CCLF, if I'm getting the acronym right. I just saw it a moment ago. So we have certain formats we support right now, the different modalities on input. And we're working on more, right? So genomics data, for example, has its own format. You can build your own ingestion if you'd like. If you've got your own format, one of the things I should have mentioned along with all of this as we're getting into this diagram is that it's meant to be extended, right? It's meant to be, in fact, I think I have a little older slide. I should have updated this. It's meant to be extended. It's a platform, right? We're giving you, this isn't a solution. This isn't an end product. You just not turnkey. You put this in place and you make it meet your needs for your requirements. It's a great question. Right now we work on, again, we can support FHIR in an ND-JSON format, DCM files for DICOM imaging, a couple other formats. We do have some tooling, and I see Paul mentioned Azure Health Data Services. If you've got HL7v2 as an example, right? We've got some transformation tooling there that allow you to take HL7v2 as an example and turn it into FHIR. and you can ingest that and then spit out ND-JSON fire. There's CCDA, I believe they have transformations for that. X12, maybe. I have to go look up the docs on it. I think Paul just posted a link in there that you can go check out. Yes, we do have some plans. We're looking at Epic, Cerner, all these different endpoints. Part of our team, we've got an entire team that focuses on interoperability, and it's to answer exactly the questions you're asking. I'll show you in the demo where we can give you some sample files and see the formats we support, but downstream coming up in future releases, we're working on opening the door to more of those. Effectively, this left-hand side of this diagram, and apologies, I should have brought in the latest and greatest version of this diagram. Very similar, but it's got some different endpoints to it. So we're working on this left-hand side under data sources, making it easier to get that data in. So I talked about, and I need to remove that preview bit, so apologies for that. I've been looking at this slide too often and spoken to it too much. So effectively, we've got Fabric, right? We built our solution on top of it. And when we deploy it, again, I'll jump into this in a moment. That left-hand side is the data source, how you get stuff in, and what we've implemented. So that process of connecting, unifying, harmonizing, transforming, and then making the data available in a certain format for your end users. We've implemented a medallion architecture, right? So we follow the medallion architecture process or industry standard for data industry standard, not healthcare, to implement this in Fabric. And these are deployed as lake houses with some other components. And in a very, very quick overview, you can see this is very high level. So we've implemented medallion with bronze, silver, and gold. There's options for this. Some of our customers do things a little bit differently, but this is how we've implemented it. And I'll show you this in our demo. Bronze is our landing zone, right? We've got files and tables that we can bring in and ingest data. And there's some options. So Fabric doesn't rely on just bringing in files. You can have what are called shortcuts. And I think I have an example of that point out to external data sources, right? So I can point this out to, if you bring your own data, BYOD, I think we'll see on some of the diagrams, or you can ingest the data into OneLake and persist it there. With the samples I'll show you, the demo will show you, we actually deploy like 50,000 patients worth of data, and it's literally millions of records, to allow you to look at this and try it out. And those are just deployed as files. Or again, you can point it to an existing lakehouse and ingest it that way. And then you run our transformations, which these are implemented as our notebooks, wired together through our data pipelines. Again, just some of the moving parts with Fabric. Again, you're probably all very familiar with this. And we get it into our middle tier, which is our silver, refined way of, one way of describing is our refined silver layer. And that's kind of the starting point of the data model we've implemented, right? So we've modeled this after FHIR. And again, I'll just show you what it looks like. It'll be easier to understand if you're not familiar with FHIR. But we've taken the FHIR standard and we've effectively made a relational model out of this. And that's following a lot of the industry work that's already been done. The real beauty of that, if you're familiar with FHIR or just JSON in general, querying JSON is painful, especially whenever you've got loads and loads of different JSON blobs and they're not related to each other. You have to traverse the references and all that jazz. Putting it into a lakehouse like this and being able to query it using SQL is like magic to me. Been working with FHIR for a while now and always finding different tools the best way to query it, but querying with SQL, it works great. And it's meant to be, again, bronze is meant to be our landing zone system of source, and sorry, immutable. We don't want that to change. We extract some metadata out to allow you to query it so that we can transform it into silver. And again, silver is a FHIR-based model, and we've done some extensions to support some different things like imaging data, which I'll show you. And then we've got another set of pipelines in the middle there for enrichment and transformation into our gold layer. So that's the final resting place for the data, right? This is what you would have your end users go look at. And this is where you can see in our diagram our cohort discovery tool. And I'll show you that. It's really neat, really powerful tool. Neat's probably an understatement. They did a lot of work on it. And you can have more than one lakehouse. And what we're looking at here in this version of the diagram, we've got OMOP and Customer Insights Lakehouse. We've got a few others with our preview components. OMOP is another standard. I'll pull up the acronym because I can never remember it. Observational medical something. It's geared towards analytics. It's a healthcare standard to allow you to do a lot of analytics against your data. FHIR is not made for analytics. OMOP is. So our transformations and our enrichments transform it from silver into gold, transform it from fire into OMOP. And that's where a lot of the smarts behind our stuff comes in. So once it's done, then you can connect to these different tools. We talked about leveraging AI and building your reports on it. That's where Power BI would come in, so AI tooling. And then even if you're doing the D365 customer insights, you connect it there. So ultimately, this is kind of another view of what we wanted to get to, and this is what we have so far. So in our current world, we went GA in end of October last year, and we've got a couple of other components. That's why I said I'll update that slide to get the final architecture in there. But we've got the relational fire and fire imaging study with clinical and imaging in GA right now. We've got patient engagement, DAX Copilot, SDOH, and claims in public preview. Got another list I'll give you some more detail on that you can take a look at. If you're not familiar with DAX, by the way, DAX is a tool that brings in ambient speech into transcriptions, and you can bring that into Fabric as well. So there's some components around that, which is pretty powerful. But this is kind of where we are now. So we're working on more as we speak. Got a new release coming up. There's the HIMSS conference. We're going to announce a few things there, so keep your eye out there. But this is what you can see. Again, just kind of reiterate, I'm talking about all of our clinical stuff, talking about healthcare stuff. This is all built on Fabric. And again, I'll jump into this in a moment. Just another view, kind of just a little kind of twist on the data model. Relational fire is kind of the center of everything for our transformations, but we've enriched it with SDOH public data. We're working on genomics, the enrichment store. You can build your own with this, working with some partners that want to enrich, for example, ICD-10 codes, as an example, as part of the fire specification. They're called codable concepts. You can inject your own data into this if you've got them. Customer extensions, you can build your own extensions to this. Again, this is our data. It's meant to be extended. It's meant to be used however you see fit. So it's not meant to be a final product. It's meant to be a platform on which you build. So very quickly, these are all things I pulled these right from the tiles we were looking at. So we've got some foundational components we deploy. Those are required, just the kind of the moving parts of what we deploy. And we'll jump into this in a moment with our demo. Foundational components, exactly what you expect them to be. Here's some of the baseline stuff you have to have. If you have Azure Health Data Services, there's a data export service. We've got some solution components that will allow you to export that into effectively blob storage and import it into our lakes. .com data transformations, OMOP. Again, there's my acronyms. There we go. DICOM is Digital Imaging and Communications in Medicine. It's been around for a long time, and it's pretty well established. And I'll show you what that looks like in our lake. OMOP Transformations, Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership. There we go. OMOP is meant for analytics, and then again, D365 Customer Insights Data Prep. These are solutions that are out there in GA. You can go and look at them right now. A list of some of our preview items. So discover and build codes. I've talked about that a few times. CMS claims data. You can see there CCLF is the format that we support, and some other formats coming. Patient outreach analytics. We talked about that. Care management as well. And again, those are in preview. So if you have use cases around the SDOH as well, if you have use cases around this, feel free to go out and check them out. And if you've got a customer or a partner, or you work at an organization that is interested in this, feel free to just drop a line. We're always looking for feedback on this. It's in preview, and one of the things our team did really well, just always make sure I give a shout out to this, is whenever you start building stuff, right? And this is, I'm probably preaching to the choir on this. How do you know you're building the right thing, right? How do we know especially in healthcare, there's decades worth of tooling out there. Everybody builds their own thing. There's standards, but everybody has a twist on them. Our team has spent an enormous amount of time working with partners, integrators, and customers to make sure we're building the right stuff. So these previews are not just thrown out there and let's wait for feedback. We work very closely with our partners and our customers directly to get feedback here. So just as a note, if you want to check this out, feel free to drop us a line. We always welcome the feedback. Okay, I've been talking a lot. Let me share. I'm just going to pull up an instance real quick, and I'm just going to walk through. I wanted to show everybody just kind of, it's more fun. You saw the slides. It's always more fun to see it in action. Let me just get rid of the slides there. I think the only thing left was a thank you slide, but I can say that. So let me pull up my Fabric instance and share real quick. Teams is a little sluggish right now, so let me know when you can see. Oh, good. Says it's sharing, so hopefully everybody can see the screen.
You can see that. Yes.
Perfect. So if you haven't tried it out yet, Fabric is what we're looking at here. By the way, we're going to our dev instance. So the URL is a little bit different. Go into our dev instance, and if you're not familiar, go to powerbi.com and you'll get access to it. Power BI is there, obviously, but all the other tools you mentioned in that stack are there. But this is how you would get access to our solution. And they start with workspaces, right? So it's kind of a grouping of the components you would work with and you would deploy. So very simple. You can see I've got a bunch of stuff. We've got a team working on stuff, but a workspace is exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of a solution if you want to think of it that way. Let me just put in a new workspace. It's really simple. Luckily this is fast. So the reason I wanted to show this is you got different options for licensing. If you're not familiar with it, you can do a trial. That's what we work with internally just because it's easy and it gives us a lot of capacity. What you might deploy with your customers is Fabric capacity. So minimal you'll need to work with our solution is Entra ID, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Entra, Microsoft Entra ID, and Fabric capacity, right? You can wire it up to your M365 accounts if you like, because that gives you Entra IDs, and then just assign capacity. They're making some changes to the licensing. I just saw some announcements about it recently, so keep an eye out on that. But at a minimum, throw some capacity out there, and you've got a Entra user, you should be able to access Fabric. So if I create a new, I canceled. If I do a new workspace, I already created one earlier, but let me create one very quickly and just show you how you get our stuff. And those are just my initials. And hit apply. That's usually pretty quick. And so you get a workspace, there's nothing in it. You've got all kinds of options to deploy here. So Fabric has all kinds of stuff. And sorry, I got a little too click happy there. Those are my favorites, but you've got all kinds of options here, right? So when you're in Fabric, you have it's pretty nice. They break it down very nicely. Visualization, accessing data, connecting, storing, preparing, all kinds of different stuff here. So they do a nice job categorizing this stuff. And again, this is our dev instance. So you might see a few things that are going to be released like in the next couple of days, but nothing under NDA, nothing bad here. You'll see it in a few minutes. Ours is another solution that's just available through this. Notebook I just do as part of a demo, but a lot of favorite stuff and healthcare data solutions this is how you would get our stuff, and you would deploy it like any other solution. We've packaged this up, and once it deploys, I'll just show you. I think we're getting some capacity issues. So like I said, dev instance. Imagine I deployed that. I've got another tenant already up. Pardon me, workspace already up, and I deployed this recently. So what you would see once that's deployed is you would see a solution be deployed. So this has already been implemented, already been rolled out, configured and rolled out. But if I open this up, this is what you'll see when it first gets deployed. It's a packaging of all of our solution components. And again, these are things we've built. You can build all of these things on your own. You'll get to see the pipeline templates. We've got, and I'll show you in more detail in the workspace view. You can see our deployed capabilities by name. These are the modules we talked about. We saw this in the slide. The pipeline templates that are deployed, and we'll dive into one or two of those in a moment. And the data exploration and analytics. This is our cohort builder tool. This is just a place that I deployed it just to show you some different stages, just because it takes a few minutes. Some of these things, depending on the data you're deploying, I'll show you the workspace in a moment where I deployed everything, and it could take quite a while because it's millions and millions of records. But if I want to deploy stuff, I would just click on any of these tiles and I could add into my workspace. We have a nice wizard effectively walking you through the steps to start with. Once it's been deployed, you can deploy the modules as needed. As I mentioned earlier, we don't want this to be a monolithic solution. no, I don't want to buy Fabric. We want you to be able to pick and choose what you need. So when you walk through the setup process, you'll be able to choose the components you want. Some of them require configuration options that we capture. But like, for example, if I'm deploying discover and build cohorts, it'll require me to deploy OMOP because there's a dependency there. So fortunately, we're smart enough with our tool. We're able to be smart enough with the tooling to build a solution that gives us a bit of help whenever you're configuring things. And I can, again, deploy whatever I want. In this place, I'm deploying pretty much everything but public preview, except for discover and build cohorts. And I just wanted to show you how it works. Once you get into the workspace, like, okay, great, you deployed it. Now, what's it made up of? And here's just a different workspace I deployed quite a while ago that I deployed all of our data. So what do you get with it, right? If I can filter up here, you can see kind of the available components. We got pipelines. An environment comes with your solution where you can configure runtime information and whatnot. We've got some custom components, which are our solution components, but notebooks, lakehouses, reports, warehouses, all kinds of stuff is available here. And some of the center of what we do, just to filter very quickly, is we have our lakehouses. And that's how we've implemented our data model, which is exactly what you would think, right? A lakehouse contains data. That's where we're going to put our schema and our data model. And I'll jump into those in a moment. Notebooks are in there as well. Yes, good question. The data lineage, somebody asked to see the data lineage. The notebooks, this is where a lot of our building blocks come in. And I'll show you one of the notebooks real quick, because it's not just a notebook. And our notebooks aren't really meant to be modified, the ones we deploy. You can build your own, but I'll show you there's some services we also deploy, some custom libraries we deploy, and you'll see that in the environment that our notebooks will invoke. We try to parameterize it as much as we can to make it reusable, but notebooks are kind of the building blocks. I think of those as the actual Lego blocks. And then the data pipelines are using those notebooks. And we've got a couple of pre-built pipelines. You can these are meant to be modified. You can inject things in here. You can copy it and build your own. But the pipelines are using the notebooks. That's how we kind of cobble together. Those are the glue, or, well, Legos don't have glue. But hopefully you get what I'm saying. So these are some of the moving parts that we deploy right with our solution to come with. The only thing I've added is I have some helper notebooks you can see. So I want to access our sample data. I wrote some very quick script, or a colleague of mine did. I don't want to take credit for that I stole it. And but the moving parts are again the pieces you'll dive into are notebooks, pipelines, and the lakehouses. So I talked about our medallion architecture, so we can just take a look at, well, let me look at the environment first. Let me take that back. So we got our solution we looked at, the healthcare environment. These are just some of the moving parts. This might be something you're more interested in as an administrator. We've got you can see our custom libraries are deployed here. Public libraries to come with, and you can change the runtime depending on what you're working on. So this comes with, we deploy the environment as part of our solution, and then we make some minor tweaks to it as part of our deployment process. So this is something that you as an administrator or you're building stuff you might be interested in. Not very interesting for the end user. Most end users won't really go and look at that. And in fact, I'm going to close down some of these tiles before it gets too noisy. I want to make sure I'm focused on the right workspace. Full disclosure, the navigation I find a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to close some of these down, make things a little bit easier. So we looked at the environment, we looked at the solution, the moving parts that come with it, and we talked about the medallion architecture. There's bronze, silver, gold. Well, we also deploy kind of some helper stuff, right? I mentioned we try to make things as configurable as possible. So we have an admin lakehouse, which is exactly what you would think. Two parts to it that are important, and this is something that our team is working on making even better. Something to think about when you're deploying a solution in Fabric is, I got these notebooks, I got pipelines, I got all these things running, and I have a development background. I'm a PM now, but I started out as a developer. How do I know when things are going well or not? How do I trace things? How do I work with these? Or if I'm an administrator, how do I know if things are going wrong? We've built an administrative lakehouse that has a series of business events. And what this will show you right now, it focuses on validation issues. So if you're running, and if you run all the data in the pipeline, just so you know, There are some validation errors just to show it to you. But, so business events is meant to just be a logging mechanism, because the logging and the monitoring, tools in Fabric are incredibly detailed, but they could also be a little bit overwhelming. So we try to give you some focused events to look at for testing things. And you can run events off of this, and we're expanding that a little bit in some future releases. But you can dive into the parameterization. This is maintained by our administrative tools. Again, just another design element we put in to try to make it easier for our deployment. It's not happy showing the JSON quite right now. It's being a little bit temperamental. So usually formats it pretty well, but this is configuration JSON based on what's been deployed. As you update your deployments, it'll update this, put in the appropriate links, and you can tweak this. You can see some of the parameters in here a little bit easier to read, but again, right now I think it's not happy with the JSON. Some other configuration options you can see. This is meant for the back end processing some of the namespaces for conventions, which I'll show you in a moment. So like there we go, they formatted it. It was just being temperamental. So you can see we try to make it as configurable as we can. This is a little bit unwieldy. You can modify this depending on your needs. We've got some docs on it, but a lot of this is maintained by our setup process. New nodes are added and configured based on some changes, but we're going to be investing a little bit more into this because, again, we want you to take this and make it your own. So we're trying to make it as flexible as we can. And that's, again, just kind of the administrative stuff, just to show you some of the thought that went into building it. But where it gets really where you really want to see things. And in fact, you asked to see the lineage. Let me just pull that up real quick. This is a really nice feature to kind of show, be a little bit overwhelming when you look at it. I think I can view out here, but you can see the lineage of all of our components, how they're all tied together and wired together. So it's a really nice feature built into Fabric to talk about our solutions. And then again, you can extend this. This is just what we've deployed, and you can see some just pieces down here. I think I got my notebooks down here that aren't really wired to anything, but really nice feature to kind of see how things are wired together for, and I believe it's whenever you link up a notebook to a Lakehouse, for example, how it'll tie it together. So it's a nice view on your solution. Again, as you build things out, it's showing what we've deployed and some other little bits that I've installed. Okay, so admin, so let's just look at bronze, right? So let's get into the actual landing zone bits and what it looks like. It's relatively simple. We've got a convention we followed for folders, and we've got two tables, and it's not very elaborate, but it's meant to be that way. So we've got clinical fire. You can see it's loading. It'll bring up like 1,000 records. And again, this is out of millions. I believe I've got millions of records in there. And we've got two landing zone tables, clinical fire and imaging DICOM. And you can expand them and see what's part of this. If you're familiar with fire, we've extracted the metadata tags out into table columns, right? So, and then we preserve the actual raw fire in a blob. And that's by design. We don't want you to modify this. We want this to be the landing zone immutable, if you want to call it that. And it's meant to be used downstream. This is the system of source, making sure we're not going to break anything. Be opinionated in the data, I think is a phrase I've heard. Imaging DICOM, very similar. We don't ingest the actual raw images. We point out to the original source, but we extract a lot of, I think it's like 30 something columns for the imaging DICOM data so that we can transform it, wire it up to the clinical data. And I'll show you that once we get to the viewer. And then we've got files. This is an interesting part. Our customers are very happy with the data we put out there because we got all these analytical stuff, all this transformations. How do I know it works? This is synthetic data that's been generated by an industry tool to not just be raw data, but looks real. You know, it's de-identified. It's all randomly generated people and stuff, but it's meant to represent real conditions and real people as opposed to just patient one and they hurt their foot. It's actually very meaningful data and allow you to run some good analytics. So this is our convention for ingestion. One of the things I mentioned, if I have an external file, I'm going through this real quick because I want to show you just some of the queries and stuff, and we got about 10 minutes left. What I can do here is I can reference clinical information. Let's say I've got AHDS export I mentioned previously. I can put in what's called a shortcut. And a shortcut is basically a way of invoking an API and looking somewhere else for the data as opposed to copying it into your Lakehouse. And you can see just some of the options that are available here. With Azure Health Data Services Export, for example, you would export it to a data lake storage Gen 2, and we would point it here, and it would show up as if it's a folder in your lake, right? So as opposed to persisting the data. So you can access it from the workflows and the pipelines, the pipelines and notebooks. It'll think it's in the Lakehouse, but it's going from somewhere else. So you bypass persisting the data and you're right into Silver. So Bronze is not very exciting. It's meant to be pretty boring. Silver is where I mentioned our work, our data model, where it really starts getting into the data model. And let me go back. I'll just open up Silver very quickly and show you what that looks like. This is a starting point of our data model focused on Fire. And this, again, if you're familiar with Fire, each of the tables in here represents a Fire resource. So you should be pretty familiar. You've got a Fire table representing account, care plan, care team. We've got a few extensions in there to support imaging so that we can unify the data as we talked about. And that's where our pipelines come in. So these are the lake houses. This is relational Fire. You can actually query this using SQL. And while it's trying to load, I'll just pull up a query real quick. Notice we don't have any files. We're in Silver. We're dealing with data tables, not files at this point. Bring up some of the queries that I had in place. Just had some real simple ones that I saved off while it's trying to load. It is, excuse me, being temperamental there. Oh, I'm in the wrong, I selected the wrong workspace, pardon me. All data, there we go. This is where I said the navigation gets a little bit challenging for me personally. So let me open up Silver again, where I save my queries off. Multiple workspaces where you would work with this. We're actually working on some documentation. There's ALM support in Fabric, and we've made our solution support ALM. Should be coming out in 2 days, I believe, going to be released. So we'll put some docs out about that. So multiple workspaces you can sync your data between, pardon me, your solution components between, and we'll be releasing some docs on that soon. But you can see here very quickly, just I can run, this is a SQL query going against, make sure I'm going against the right table. So I'm going against Silver. I'm querying Fire data using SQL. And again, as somebody who had to do that with code for a long time, super painful. Oh, again, I'm getting some issues with executing. There we go. It's being temperamental today because we're doing a demo, of course. So while that's running, I know we only got a few minutes left. What I wanted to show you is how do we unify the data? What do I mean by that? How do we see that in action? I've got these different databases where I have to go query to see it. And what we have is this cohort builder tool. And I'm going to pull up, I've already set this up. It's effectively a tool baked into our solution that is surfaced through Fabric, but it allows you to query against OMOP. OMOP can be really comprehensive and really, really complex. It's part of our Gold Lakehouse, and I kind of glossed over that. It's got its own schema. We can take a look at that. I'll share the links to the documentation. But once I've got all my data in there, I ran some pipelines. And now that I've got it in here, we've built a copilot that allows you to use natural language queries to construct a query on OMOP. And the reason it's important to talk about it on OMOP is it's unified our clinical and our imaging data. And you notice I ran this previous because it could take a moment or two, and I've got 365 patients, one per day in a non-leap year, patients in my cohort. So if I'm building a cohort of patients that I want to take a look at, that could be really daunting, especially if it's in multiple different systems, siloed systems. Now we've unified it. It can still be complex because OMOP is its own thing and can be really hard to understand. I'm familiar with Fire, but not really super familiar with OMOP quite yet. How do I query that data? I can actually edit it in my query builder. This should look familiar if you're familiar with Power Platform. Very similar look and feel. I can modify my query, and you notice I'm not looking at numbers. I'm looking at actual values. And over here, it pulls up the number for me, so it allows me to build some more complex queries. And when I run it, you can actually see the SQL behind it. I couldn't build that by hand just because of my lack of familiarity. And you can see it's working. It's condition codable concepts, which is a whole thing in itself. And I can also see the data once it's been executed. So this is, again, just in a tabular format, which is great. But if I'm not, if I don't want to work in Excel or work in tables, once this loads up, I'll show you we have a viewer built in with it. And this is where it really shows off highlights the magic of the tool. And I'm not trying to oversell it, but it's a really powerful feature. If I'm looking at this data and I want to evaluate how well this cohort fits, I can just go in and take a look at the data, not just in a tabular format, but, and sorry, it's a little bit slow right now. I've got a list of my records, and I can expand on all the data behind that, right? And where it's important is I can bring up the demographic information, and you can see patient identifier. It's actually been de-identified to a degree. You can look at the patient notes in here. So I've got complaints. This is what I meant by synthetic data. This is realistic data. It's got medications, allergies, etc. But this is the actual part that shows the unification has actually happened, right? Kept talking about it. How do you know it's really working? This is all the synthetic data we've put together. You've got access to this data with a solution, and I can look right at the imaging data that's associated with the patient, wired up through the identifiers in our pipelines, and then I can go look at the metadata around it. I'm not a imaging specialist. I don't know what this means. It's important to imaging specialists though. But I've now seen, and again, I'll show you the pipelines. We got 1 or 2 more minutes. I'll show you where this came from. We've got our bronze, silver, and gold. I'm looking at the gold right now. I'm looking at all the data together in one place in that one lakehouse in this tool. And then if I want to, I can just save all this data off for further evaluation with my team. So that's a really powerful tool we're putting together. And again, being able to run this natural language to a query is extremely powerful. I'm a developer, but I'm not a real powerful database person. Probably most database engineers want to keep me away from the database. But that's a really powerful tool if I'm coming in as a clinician. How did I get the data there? I mentioned some of the notebooks and data pipelines. I'll pull up real quick, very quickly here. This is the clinical data ingestion pipeline. This is what I meant by kind of the moving parts, the building blocks, the Lego blocks. And again, apologies, it's just a little bit slow right now. But if I open up the data pipeline, you'll see it's not super fancy. It's not very elaborate. We've got calls out the notebooks. So raw process movement is a baked-in notebook we've built that moves files around into the appropriate place for ingestion. The bronze ingestion is actually, we'll take that ND-JSON format. I think there was a question earlier about what's it look like. ND-JSON, it'll put it into a row per table, or pardon me, a row per resource. This will take that out and bring it into that table. Once that's done, bronze, silver, flat, and we'll take that JSON, turn it into the silver we looked at. And if you look at the details behind this, I just wanted to show you very quickly. This is bound to a notebook that we built. This is meant to be modifiable. The pipeline injects stuff in it, start from scratch, build your own if you want. But the notebooks that we deploy are meant to be not meant to be modified. But what you can see is these are the backend services we put in. And again, Fabric services, not external web services, not hosted on Azure. This is all deployed with our custom libraries, deployed and invoked from a notebook. And you can see this is just in Python Spark language. And this is a service that we've built. This is where the work of doing the transformation on the back end comes in. So you're meant to call the stuff we build. And again, we're working on making this a little bit more flexible, a little bit more reusable, a little more parameterized as we go. But this is where a lot of the work for doing that transformation happens. And it's just invoked from a notebook. And you can build your own. Again, you can inject different steps in here. You can build your own notebook from scratch. You can just kind of see the convention. And you can extend this with different parameters in the pipeline calls. But these are kind of the moving parts you would get into where you could actually extend our stuff and move past just the out-of-the-box stuff. Okay, so I got 1 minute. I think I saw some questions in there. See if I can answer them very quickly. I will do my best to answer questions offline too. So feel free to reach out to the team. You can reach out, and if I can't answer the question, I'll reach out to the team and see if we can get some answers for you. But I think we're right at time. I don't know if if it's okay to go over a minute or two or not. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Totally okay. You can take the questions.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to go through real quick. I'll put my information into the into the chat as well. So if you want to reach out, or again, reach out to the team, and I'll try to answer as best I can. Just going to scroll through this real quick. Looks like Paul's been doing a really good job. I appreciate it, answering a lot of these questions.
Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, I just saw the pronunciation of Entra as Active Directory. Just saw that.
That's funny.
Saw the lineage. I think we looked at the lineage, and I see you're an early adopter of AHDS and you're struggling. Love to hear more about that. Feel free to drop me a line if you have, if you're working at the organization. I see Amit put that in. Feel free to drop us a line. Love to hear more about your challenges. It's been around for about 5 years, and I think some of the early adopters did face some challenges. If you're not familiar with AHDS, what we're talking about in the chat is Azure Health Data Services. It's there's two services that are key. There's a Fire service and a DICOM service. Fire service, as I mentioned, Fire is an industry standard based on HL7. HL7 owns the specification. They've got a specification not just for the structure we looked at, but also how to communicate, right? The protocols behind it. HL7 v2.x was a whole separate, it was TCP/IP based. It was moving around text files. Fire is JSON based, but they've also got a specification for the REST endpoints. So Azure Health Data Services is full implementation of that specification. And they've, in the recent years, I think they're finally retiring Gen 1. Gen 2 should be a full implementation, got past a lot of the limitations, much more storage space as well as performance. So definitely worth checking out again. DICOM services are an implementation of the DICOM specification for persisting data. That's an enormous, it typically requires an enormous amount of storage. It's built on the OneLake, like we're looking with Fabric. So definitely something to check out there. It's got some APIs for interacting with imaging data. We've got some components that'll wire into it, like we do with the Fire export. We do DICOM export. So definitely something to look at there. If you're familiar with it, definitely feel free to reach out. They're part of our team now, so I have access to the product team there. I think that's about with the questions. Again, I'll drop my information in here. I think I had one more slide, but I'll drop my information into the chat. Feel free to drop me a line. And thanks for listening. I appreciate really good questions and appreciate you giving me the time to speak.
Thank you so much, Jim. That's a really great. I learned a lot today in this session. I will definitely go ahead and look at the recording again. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I was going to say is hopefully, I didn't mean this to be a sales pitch for our solution. I really wanted you to understand this is something we built on Fabric, right? I'm not part of the Fabric team, but it is a really powerful platform for building this stuff, and it's meant to be extended. So this audience, I think you're focused on data technologies. I'd be really interested to hear more about what you have going on with the platform. Love you to take our stuff too, but definitely wanted to highlight what we've built on Fabric and some of the capabilities there.
Thank you. There are several. Tom mentioning thank you. Interesting to see how much Microsoft has done for healthcare in Fabric. Absolutely. We can see that in this presentation.
Yep, more to come too. So we got some releases coming up soon. Again, there's an enormous healthcare conference called HIMSS. It's the kind of place to be every year, and we've got some announcements coming out there, extending some of our preview stuff and some more capabilities coming out. So definitely keep an eye out. We'll be putting some blog posts out about it soon. The ALM capabilities in Fabric, we've enabled our solution to work with that, but I've just been working on that recently. Definitely something to talk about with your teams. Most of that, what we're talking about is just we've enabled the Fabric platform features, which is great. So wasn't an enormous amount, a huge lift on our team side. But that's something definitely to check out, because that's one of the questions we get a lot is, well, how do I move between workspaces? And we've all been there, right? So definitely something to check out there with the Fabric capabilities, and we're going to enable it as well. Yeah, but I'll keep an eye on the chat too. Oh, and I see Fabric capacity. What I've noticed with a solution here, you can use F2, F4. I usually use F8 just so that I can do things concurrently, but it's really depends on what you're doing with it. A lot of our devs will just jump in, turn on F2, F4 for while they're working. The trial that I'm using, we get F64. So I love using that because everything goes much faster. But for using our solution, I've been demoing it with like F8 just to make it a little bit quicker, and I can do things concurrently. And I believe, yeah, there's going to be several demos in HIMSS with this and other capabilities.
By the way, what is HIMSS?
I'm sorry?
What is HIMSS? HIMSS?
Yeah, that is and yeah, good point on the 64. You're right. It's in a large. I went a couple of years ago. There's about 50,000 people there. It's for the healthcare industry. So
Okay.
you'll get hospital systems there. You'll get clinicians there. Companies like Microsoft, Nuance, Epic, other organizations. Lots of sessions. Lots of we meet a lot of our customers there. It's a great way to get feedback and find out what's going on, as well as showcase our stuff. So it's kind of the industry standard for healthcare. Very big, very large, lots and lots of people there. So it's a really interesting place.
Very good to know that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's first or second week of March. So it's coming up soon.
Oh, okay. Good to know that. Thank you.
Yeah, the team is working hard at getting ready for that. It's a lot of work.
Got it. So any more questions from the attendees? If you do not have any questions, then you can contact Jim Novak on LinkedIn. And you can check with him later if you have any more questions. But if you do not have any questions right now, then thank you so much one more time for attending this session today. So yeah, so let me go ahead and we will see you soon with another session, and follow the YouTube, follow our YouTube channel, and follow us on LinkedIn to know our upcoming sessions as well. So yeah, thank you so much once again. Thank you, Jim. Let me go
Thank you.
ahead and
Thanks, everybody.
stop the recording.